Hello and welcome to my first Planet Zoo speed build. Now, this one is going to be of a fox habitat. And this is going to be the first habitat in this zoo that I've recently started. So as you can see at the zoo entrance, I worked a lot with these rock walls, and I'm just trying to integrate the habitat with it. I really think foxes are cool animals as an opener animal, especially in temperate European zoos, because they're just too common here. For the fence, I try to go for... I was really looking at what kind of fences you use for foxes generally, and there seems to be a large variety. Sometimes it's just very low fences, and sometimes it's even aviaries or something similar with the top closed off. So now here I try to go for this typical wire mesh fence, what you call it. They tend to have these rectangular rather than square holes. So I try to simulate that by just, again, placing them down double, as you can see here. But I ended up ditching that idea again because it was too dense. So the mesh was too dense, and that ended up looking a bit too... Well, you couldn't look into the habitat as well, so I kind of completely reworked that, as you can see here. And I also went for this angled top, so this climbing protection at the top. This is something that you will mostly see with cat enclosures, not for dogs like foxes, but you sometimes see it for foxes. And again, you sometimes even see completely closed tops, like in an aviary for fox habitat. So I don't really know what's up with that whether foxes can just climb that well, but sometimes you don't see it, so it's maybe just precautions. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, I went for that design because I just like how it looks. It just doesn't look as dull as a normal fence. And it works quite well with the new pieces altogether. I went, as you can see, for the mesh. I used wood and these, or for the frame, I used wood and these pieces from the Twilight pack. These metal pieces from the gate, I think it is. And I think it looks quite good. It's relatively simple, but yeah, nothing wrong with that. Also checking up the height here with one of the staff members. And sadly, I forgot to record the next part where I built the basic layout of the habitat, as you can see here. So first of all, I did this little viewpoint. It's nothing special really. It's just planks and a glass panel in between. And a little roof on top to protect the glass from rain, I guess. And then I built these rock walls. Now this one is pre-built. I built this in another zoo, and it's just stalactites, as you can see. I think they have this very natural look to them. This is why I love building rock walls with these. I built a complete set with them. That it's a massive set. So this was built in another zoo, and again, I love the natural rough texture that they have. This is also in the workshop, I think. Now, this is another type of rock wall that I also imported from another zoo, and this is primarily made out of the temple pieces from the South America pack. They have this very edgy, rough look to them, which make them look like stones broken out from a quarry instead of just natural, smooth, round stones like the most you have in the game. And this is what I like about this wall. And there's also a set of stones that I used here. I also integrated, as you can see, I integrated the fence into this rock wall, and yeah, so it kind of transitions smoothly into the side of the habitat. I don't know how accurate this is with climbing ability of the fox, but whatever. And as you can see, the back of the habitat is just logs. Now, what's really interesting about this habitat altogether is these embankments. Now, this I got inspired by this from a zoo from Haribo that's also in the workshop. And I like the idea of building these embankments in combination with roots. So this is mostly made from the false roots. You will see when I build the second of these. The top is just normal tropical rocks, and then I kind of put these stalactites again. These are the big stalactites. And the back side, or the underside of them rather, looks very earthy. If you give it a dark brown coloration, it looks almost like dirt. And this is why I think this is perfect to simulate dirt, especially in places where you can terraform. Also, at the bottom line out there is just these tropical rocks. And yeah, we are going to build the second of these embankments on the other side. They're kind of the core of this habitat, having both of these embankments. The reason why I put water down is so my entire terrain doesn't get messed up by placing down the fox den. The problem here, of course, is in contrast to the other side, that I have to make sure that you can't see any of these pieces, as you can see there, through the fox den or the opening of the cave. And yeah, kind of closing these gaps was kind of difficult, but I ended up using one of the smaller ones. So as you can see, I didn't really manage to close up the gap there, but I used one of the smaller ones of the stalactites, and that worked very well. And overall, this entire embankment ended up looking very cool. You just have to make sure to close off all the gaps so it looks like actual dirt and not like rock, as it is rock, and transition it smoothly into the ground. Now, a problem that I have when building temperate deciduous forest is that there's not really many trees to choose from. Most of them just don't look good. As you can see, most of the temperate trees just look like a trunk with a bowl of leaves on top. Not just very good. So I end up using mostly the cork oak, this one, also the one on the other side, because this one, despite being a rather arid tree from like North Africa, it looks a lot like your typical temperate deciduous trees, like something like a beech tree or oak. I mean, it is an oak, but not a normal oak. And yeah, it has a very nice leaf color as well. And for the back there, I went with the water to palo, because this one also has a very nice rose pattern. And you can really see the branches branching off very nice, and overall the leaf shape and leaf color. It's only a bit light in coloration. That's like one thing that bothers me about this one. And of course the roots to just kind of detail it a little more and a little bit more, and also they kind of hide eventual issues with the overall dirt or fake dirt. Because they kind of cover that a little bit. So that works very well. And in general, building these embankments and this entire setup was dirt and root that looked very well. There you could just briefly see the entrance building. But that's not finished in on itself, especially with the gift shop, so not to really show there yet. But the gift shop is kind of interesting. I might show it at some point. Now, it's not that easy working with these roots, in my opinion, because they tend to have weird shapes, and just finding the right one and placing it in a right angle so it looks good is not that easy. But it kind of worked out relatively well here. There's also a lot more places where I will place roots in this habitat. Now, again, the reason why I choose the fox habitat as the first one is because they're in a temperate zoo located in Europe. Foxes are kind of not really animals that you go to the zoo for, simply because, at least in my opinion, they are very common where I live. So the fox is probably one of the somewhat larger animals that you're more likely to see in the wild. And this is the reason why I think they're not that special, even though they're very cute, of course, but I love foxes. But yeah, they're a good opener, because I always think that animals from like the region your zoo is in, especially animals that are not that spectacular, like elephants, crocodiles, and stuff like that, are a very good opener in any zoo. And yeah, this is why I choose the fox habitat as the first one in this entire zoo. Now, of course, foxes generally live in forest, which is why I went for this forested look. But the issue with building forest, especially the ones located in temperate climate, is it's very hard to do that in Planet Zoo for several reasons. First of all, the plants. As I said, there are not many very good trees that you can use. I ended up basically just using the mixture of the cork oak, the Tula Palo, and some other trees. But most of the temperate trees don't look good in my opinion, especially the oak and beech tree and all that stuff. As I said before, they're just a trunk with a bowl of leaves on top. They're mostly from the main game, and these trees have kind of been outclassed by the newer ones, which just look much better. And here I try to not line up the trees too perfectly so it doesn't look unnatural. So I placed this trunk a bit further to the left and the water tulip halo a bit further to the right, so it looks more natural. Just on a side note here. So yeah, back to building forests. So the problem is, the next problem is there's not many plants or not many ground coverage that you can use. There's no grass in a forest. That's what a lot of game devs even do wrong when designing forests. There's often way too much grass in forests in games, but there shouldn't be grass, at least in very dense forests, because there's not enough light for the grass. And this is why you would need to place other plants, but there's not that many plants. And really dense forests do not even tend to have that many plants in them. They tend to have just dirt without grass and leaves. And this is another problem. There are not many good leaves in the game. Or rather, at the moment, there aren't really any. There are just the autumn leaves, which obviously do not fit in this setting altogether. And we will be getting leaves in the next update, but I built this long before the tropical pack was announced. And yeah, there's the red fox. And yeah, so I didn't have them available at this point. And basically, I got the idea for this habitat when I last built a badger habitat. I also worked a bit with roots and stuff like that, and it turned out very nice. You just have to find a way to kind of decorate the ground. Basically, what you would go for realistically is just dirt and maybe some solitary ferns and stuff like that on a forest floor. But this ends up looking very bland, and the reason for that is here I experiment with the leaves. As you can see, they're just way too bright orange. I don't know why they just didn't make them colorable, so you can color them brown or light dark green or something like that. Maybe they will do that. Sometimes they add color, or they add the ability to colorize pieces later on, as they did with the I think the concrete and the plaster pieces, some of which weren't, or the chalk pieces, I think it was, not chalk, calcite, I don't know what exactly they're called, but these white ones. Here you can see I really struggle with choosing trees. The elm tree is one of the few from the original game that I really like, because it's very natural looking when it comes to its growth pattern. But that's about it. There are not that many great of the larger trees, at least, that I really like to use. So I really struggle with what kind of tree to use here. I don't want to keep using the cork oak over and over again. It becomes very repetitive in that regard. So I was really looking for trees here. So yeah, again, as I was saying, basically the problem is that the terrain in Planet Zoo just doesn't look that good. First of all, it's too light in my opinion. It should be darker and more saturated. And also there should be a larger variety, like terrain just covered by leaves. You have that on the tropical map, but you don't have access to that when you build in a temperate zoo, which is, I think, a very big problem. For example, Prehistoric Kingdom has the option to use all textures in any kind of map, in any kind of biome you are in. I don't know why Planet Zoo doesn't have that. It's very annoying. So yeah, but I would love to have a ground, a texture with leaves, and especially one that is darker. Despite the coloration itself, another problem is that you sometimes see in the back of the habitat, when you view the dirt from the side, it tends to have this very light gray bluish look. I think this is because it reflects the sky. This is another problem. The ground just doesn't seem dark enough, and this is the reason why I decided to cover the entire habitat here with rocks, or rather with something that's supposed to look like dirt. So as you can see, I mostly use the stalactites and the tropical rocks here because they have a very nice brown coloration, and in my opinion this works very well in creating this dirty, muddy like terrain that looks very natural, or well, as natural as it gets. And this adds, in my opinion, it adds enough detail to the ground that you don't need anything like leaves anymore. It just looks good nonetheless. Of course, this is also a lot of work, as you can see, because the entire enclosure needs to be covered here. And one thing I should mention here is that I use the mod. I use two mods. I built this using two mods. One is Freebuild. This one doesn't affect anything that you build afterwards, so everyone in the workshop can just use it normally, for example. And if you uninstall the mod, everything stays the same. That's the cool thing about Freebuild. But as you can see here, I decided to put the foxes in their habitat now, or build the entrance to the habitat to try and see if they can even use this habitat. Because with so many rocks and stalactites and roots placed down, my fear was that they can't even use that. Now, again, what I was about to say is that I installed a mod called Planet Zoo Plus, and what this does basically is, among other things, it makes the hitboxes of basically all animals much smaller. And this was my hope, that I could put much more detail into this habitat through this mod. And as you can see, it works. So the fox can use most of the habitat very much without any problems, just by this mod. Yeah, I really hope that this will allow the foxes to mostly use the habitat, and it ended up doing so. So yeah, I try to go for a fountain here where there would be some kind of bucket or so below it where the fox can drink from, instead of having this giant water spot, whatever you want to call it there. And I have a bug with colorizing it, so I try to experiment with what kind of container you could use for the water where the fox would drink from. And I tried around with this plate. I think it's from the Indian pack, and this got me an idea from something that I've done in a previous habitat before, and that is putting essentially putting tree mushrooms onto trees. Now you will see in a second there, I got this idea of using these as tree fungi, and this gave me the idea that we have actual fungi by now in the game, and I just used them. And obviously they look much better, and this is something that just gives so much more detail into the game. To just have something simple as tree fungi in the trees in the forest just makes it look more foresty, I guess. I guess Frontier even has realized this when you look at the new pack that has a lot of these tree dwelling plants like ferns and all that kind of stuff that actually grows in the trees. Yeah, so I think that's a very cool thing. Sadly they glow in the dark. I had this idea of this waste container, this radioactive container causing the glow, but yeah, of course we're not doing that. And just don't look at the habitat at night, I guess. And again, most of the video is just placing down stuff as dirt. And I really wasn't happy with what kind of container you could use for this entire water thing. Most of them were too big for the fox or just looked comically small. The main issue that I ended up having is that the fox will drink at the edge of the actual water, which means they would drink from the ground, which looked very weird. So in the end, I would end up ditching this entire thing again and just placing it down normally. But I really experimented a lot with what kind of container you could put down there, and which one would be the correct size for the fox. But I wasn't really happy with any of them, because just the entire pump here looks a bit too big for whatever container you could use that would be small enough for the fox. Just again, one of the typical Planet Zoo size problems. So I ended up just using this gutter piece temporarily as a small water container, whatever you want to call it. But again, I ended up ditching that in the end. And yeah, most of it now is just placing down more dirt. That's basically also the reason why I this enclosure is so small. Like for a normal average zoo, this would be a big enclosure for something like a fox. For Planet Zoo standard, it's very small. I think in the end the fox ends up having like 200 square meters of space, which is way too small for a normal fox. But again, with Planet Zoo Plus, the hitbox or both the hitboxes become smaller, and the requirement for space for the animals also becomes smaller. So of course, you can just also turn that off altogether. The space requirements for animals, you can always turn them off in the sandbox settings. And yeah, this little plant, the Lords and Ladies plant, I hate the hitbox it has. It's awful. You can't really use it for anything because of the massive hitbox. But it looks awesome. Sometimes this hitbox isn't a problem for some reason. It's just a problem sometimes, and sometimes it's not. And yeah, again, just placing down a lot of stalactites and rocks to just make it look like actual dirt. And it, as you can see, it just looks so much better than just having the bare terrain there, which tends to look way too light and not brown enough and all that stuff. And with all that dirt just placed down, that fake dirt, it just looks so much better. You don't even need a lot of plants in these spots, which you wouldn't have. Again, a forest floor wouldn't have that many plants. And so this is kind of, in my opinion, the best solution that you could come up with. Just having these, just having this detail in the terrain without it looking too barren and without there being too many trees or too many plants on the ground. That would make it look weird and not foresty enough. Yeah, as I said before, it's hard building forests in Planet Zoo. But I'm very happy with the solution. And here you can see another thing that you can pay attention to when building forests. At the edge of the forest, you always have smaller trees where the leaves reach down to the bottom. This is primarily because there will be light reaching further down, and so you will have smaller trees and more bushes and stuff like that, with basically the leaves covering the side of the forest, so you can't really look directly into it. And in the back, or rather in the center of the forest, where it's more deep, kind of, you will have taller trees with leaves only at the top of the trunk. Which is, again, the issue I have with most of the tempered trees. They look like trees when they grow on a plain, on a field, instead of how they look in a forest. Especially the beech trees and so on. They just don't look like beech trees look when they're in a forest. They look like trees look on an open field. And this is why it's so hard building forests in Planet Zoo. Hence why I end up looking mostly the cork oak, which I used 3 times in this enclosure alone. 2 different variants. But the maple tree also is kind of useful, at least when you want smaller trees. I don't like the larger maple trees, but the smaller ones look cool. And they just look so typically, so typically tree-like, tempered tree-like. And everywhere where there's trees, obviously there would be roots. Kind of the idea of this kind of steep habitat where the dirt mostly got eroded away, and of course this is why you can see the roots sticking out of the ground in some places. And they also add a lot of detail to the ground without using too many plants. So that's kind of a compromise that I went for there. Having not that many plants in the habitat, but therefore having the roots that would give it detail. And since we can't have leaves, that's kind of the only way, at least not yet. That's kind of the only way to get access to detail without using plants on a forest floor. Yeah. So a lot of placing just stuff down, trying to experiment with what these rocks end up looking. And I was really surprised that the foxes could still basically walk everywhere, despite there being so many stuff on the ground. So this is like one of the biggest problem Planet Zoo has, in my opinion. That when you place down even minor things like little pebbles or plants or whatever, they tend to have a very weird hitbox, and then the animal just can't walk there anymore. And it just ends up looking good, but you can't use it as a habitat. But if you don't do it, it looks very barren and all that stuff, and it's really a pain building ground coverage in this game because the animals are just so special. And then I also tried experimenting more with the smaller stalactites to give it a bit of variation here, because it just ended up looking... this is the next thing why also this habitat has to be so small. If it was bigger, I think it would look weird, because it would look very repetitive, and it would look like whether I generically place down a lot of it. This is why I generally like smaller habitats, because you can go more into detail with smaller habitats, because for bigger habitats it just becomes such a grind, placing all of these pieces down, trying to make it look detailed without it looking generic, and you end up making it look generic because you have to place a lot of pieces everywhere, and you can't just add much detail everywhere. So if this habitat was any bigger, and I noticed this was the next habitat, which I will show in the next video, which is much bigger, and it ended up being a pain putting all these pieces down. This also works in this habitat so well because it has a steep incline. Oh, well, not a steep, but it has an incline. It kind of goes up in the back. If it was rather flat, I think it would look very weird with all this rough terrain. Now, again, I went for this kind of embankment in the back again, simply so we have a flat part in the back and in the back, mostly so the animals have more space to use. The flatter the terrain, the rather they can use it, and also so that there's the habitat entrance, and before the habitat entrance you obviously always need a flat space. And now the terrain, or our kind of created terrain through these rocks, is kind of finished, and we can finally go to plants. As I said, there will not be that many plants, and the amount of plants you can use for temperate forests in Planet Zoo is really limited. It basically just comes down to fern. Again, the leaves, they just don't look good with the coloration. It comes down to mostly fern and some other plants, like the nettles, of course, and of course the periwinkle leaf, one of my favorite plants in the game, as well as the Lord and Lady plant, which it has this weird hitbox, but it still looks good, so I will still use it here for this habitat. Put some fern into the wall. I think the new ferns from the new tropical pack will look awesome in walls, so you can actually place them sticking out of walls. I think that will look amazing, even in the temperate setting. But for this, for now, I went with the normal bracken fern and these salt bush things, whatever they're called. And of course, the front part of the habitat where the forest kind of ends, it shapes more into a meadow or just a field, grassland, whatever you want to call it. And again, what I tend to do when building grass, instead of just using the in-game grass, it doesn't look good in my opinion. I place down an underlying layer of the periwinkle leaves. It kind of looks like something like clover, or generally something that will be growing below the grass, and then I place the actual grass beneath that. And as you can see here, the back of the forest, there will just be a few ferns, not really too many plants, because in my opinion, we already created enough detail through the fake dirt and the roots alone, and I don't think we need that many plants in this case in order to make it look more detailed and not look dull. So a few plants placed here and there, especially the ones that will grow in low lighting conditions. Again, don't put grass in a forest. Sometimes they are pine forests which let in more light, and this way you can have more grass and more plants on the forest floor. But generally, these temperate forests, they are very dense. There's not a lot of light coming through, and this is why you will only have plants adapted to low lighting conditions, such as ferns, such as the periwinkle leaves, and that's basically where it stops in the game. There's not that many plants. Also, I try to integrate some of the enrichment items here. Most of them I just don't like the looks of most of them. What I know is that in the zoos, what they do a lot, especially with cats. So, for example, for cats, they use sacks and then put stuff that smells inside of these sacks. So this can be stuff like catnip, but also dead animal parts, perfume, all kinds of stuff. And this is why I put just the sack down with the blood sensing. So this could be a scented sack of some sort. And yeah, of course, everything that's small and can just roll away, such as this feeder or the tennis ball and the bamboo feeder, all of that stuff, you can place down without big problems. And now again, what I did here is everywhere where the periwinkle leaves would come out more, I would place less grass, and where there was less of the periwinkle leaves, I would place more grass. And this ended up looking very nice, I think, because essentially this comes down to what kind of ground you have, where the ground is more fertile, and when there's less stomping around by the foxes, they will grow more grass and taller grass, but in the other places they will the more hardy plants, in German we call them Unkraut, but they will persist more. So everyone who has a garden with lawn will know that issue, that in some places there will just be stuff like moss or these little ground coverage plants that you don't want to have on your grass, but they still come through here and there, especially when the grass is not really growing that well. And this is kind of the effect that I was trying to go for here. Another thing that the game lacks is good bushes. So here I was experimented on a lot with what kind of bush to put in the corner there, and most of them just don't look good in my opinion. They are way too round, way too clean. They basically look like bushes that were manually cut by someone, like they're placed in a garden. They just don't look natural in my opinion. One bush that I really like in that regard is this one. So this is the, I think it's called a willow tree. It's a willow bush, something like that, and it has a very nice growth pattern where you can actually see the separate branches instead of it again just being a bowl of leaves. And that pretty much already covers that when it comes to plants. Again, not that many plants in this habitat, just here and there a few nettles, and in the back of the habitat I ended up not placing that many plants at all, because why would there be a lot of plants when it's too dark for most plants? We already have the roots, there's already enough detailing there, so why would we need plants? I think it actually looks better this way, and it kind of marks the transition from the meadow or the grass to the forest. And speaking of transition, this is why I placed down a lot more ivy here, because this kind of also created a more smoother transition from the habitat into the back of the habitat, or the enclosure, the fence, by essentially just creating the illusion that the logs, which are the fence, are tree trunks and the ivy is just leaves. So it basically looks like the forest, or kind of gives away the illusion that the forest kind of continues there by having both tree trunks and leaves being visible. So you could actually imagine that the back of the habitat just continues like that. I had a lot of problems with what kind of door to place there. I really like the appearance of this low door, but at the same time, there's nothing in the game that you could make it taller with, because the actual wire frame is just way bigger than the one that's actually in the door. So it just doesn't look good. And this is why I ended up just covering it with an actual door. And yeah, I think it doesn't look as good, but it looks okay, so I'm kind of fine with it. And I'm kind of happy with how this turned out. And yeah, basically this finishes up the habitat, just here and there a few plants. I ended up polishing it a bit, which I didn't record again sadly, but it's mostly just the flowing leaves that I placed down, as well. Yeah, some more ivy. I placed some of the flowing leaves here and there, and also I did some of the some plants in the grass. So as you can see, there are some flowers now in the grass here and there, but nothing major. And the falling leaves kind of give it a foresty vibe. I'm really happy with how this turned out. In the back you can always see the next habitat. Spoiler. Very foresty. These embankments in the back, just make it look awesome. I think I really was very careful with placing flowers here, just very briefly, a few flowers here and there. And as you can see, I ditched the idea of having a little container for the water and just let it be some kind of pond with a bit duckweed on top, because it ended up looking just better, and the foxes will drink from the water's edge. And if you place a container down, they will just drink from the ground. It just looks weird. So I ended up just letting it be like it is. So yeah, that's that. So yeah, thank you for watching. I really enjoyed building this, and see you next time.